Good morning, friends. We are on Chapter 12, just a phone call away, Portland, Oregon. In his 40s, Alan Levine lost both legs to frostbite when he fell asleep drunk under an overpass in an Illinois snowstorm. Somehow he survived this, and in time he migrated west, ending up in Portland, Oregon. He was already a long-time heroin addict. Levine first used heroin at the age of 20 in New York, and that first shot made him feel the way he wanted to feel the rest of his life, like the king of the world and the president of everything. All his life, Alan Levine loved drugs and the charge they gave him, but the lack of his legs got in the way. He shuffled around on prosthetics. Usually he procured dope from some house where he had a connection, or by wandering around the Old Town Chinatown neighborhood north of Portland's downtown, an arduous trek repeated 3 or 4 times a day. Levine hobbled along, driven by his addiction. Each time he never knew what he was getting or whether he would be robbed or arrested. He'd make it back to his motel, fix and zone out until it was time to go look for more, surviving on panhandling and a monthly disability check. In 1993, Levine returned to Portland after a year away. He heard that dealers had come to town who now delivered dope if he called in an order. Somehow Levine got their business card, though years later he couldn't remember precisely how. He had never known of a heroin dealer with a business card and a convenient number you could call. With that card, well, Alan Levine might have just died and gone to heaven. Wayne Baldassare, meanwhile, was sure he was entering hell. Baldassare was a cop who loved dope work. He'd been on the Portland Police Drugs and Vice Division since 1982. He loved the creativity the job required, that he had to use and care for informants. Each day was different, an undercover buy in the morning, a search warrant in the afternoon. The job required imagination because the dealers were themselves endlessly creative. For years, heroin was the easiest drug to work because it was sold out of houses. You arrested a junkie. Terrified of withdrawing in jail, he'd tell you how a dope house worked. The junkie would bring an undercover officer to the dealer, then you busted the place. But in 1991, Baldassare saw all that change. Young Mexican guys, clean-cut, courteous, and looking quite out of their element, were driving the town in old cars delivering heroin. All of a sudden, you got a dispatch center taking orders and calling these delivery guys, he said. It made it very hard to get a good case. You were looking at hours of surveillance for 5 or 6 small bags of dope. The delivery drivers did tours of 6 months and then left. If they were arrested, they were deported, not prosecuted, because they never carried large amounts of dope. The cases were always light. Baldassare first figured they were small-timers. Later he realized quite the contrary. They had learned how drug investigations worked. Prosecutors prized cases with large quantities of drugs. Crack and methamphetamine were the priorities then, each measured in kilos. As camouflage, these Mexican heroin guys used just-in-time supplying, like any global corporation, to ensure that they had only tiny quantities in their cars or apartments. This, too, was sophistication Baldassare didn't see in the heroin underworld. Soon these delivery drivers crowded into Portland. Heroin prices dropped, and Baldassare watched the drivers get wise. They drove in circles to lose the officers following them. It took 4 or 5 officers to tail one car. Up to then, Portland hadn't much of an aerial police service. One officer owned a 4-seat Cessna and charged the city for gas when he used it for police work, which wasn't often. Now the airplane was pressed into regular service with a pilot and an observer watching the heroin delivery car on the street below. Baldassare was the observer. Peering through binoculars from above, he radioed locations to his colleagues on the ground. It was grueling work and went on for hours. Baldassare was one of the few officers who could peer through binoculars from the plane as it went around in circles without getting airsick. As the drivers tooled around Portland all day making deliveries, Baldassare spent 10-12 hours a day in the plane, watching from 2,500 feet in the air, stopping only to refuel. This was before GPS, nor were there cell phones to track. It was line of sight, he said. If you looked away, you could lose them. So you picked your times to look away. If your neck was getting a kink in it, you had to choose when to massage it. Above downtown, Baldassare could follow a heroin car for a half circle of the plane, then lose it behind a building as the Cessna completed its circle, hoping to pick up a new go-round. Cars easily got lost under Portland's dense canopy of trees. Before long, the department had to expand its Air Force. An Air Force was a luxury most police departments the size of Portland's can't afford, but which this new heroin system made necessary. The city hired another 2 pilots. Finally, the department bought a new plane with full-length windows for easier surveillance. Their business card was yellow. It had a phone number and an eagle with a snake in its talons, the emblem on the flag of Mexico. That was all. No names, no slogan. Call any time, Alan Levine was told. One night he did. Give us 20 minutes, said the guy on the end of the line. To Levine's immense surprise, within 15 minutes, a Mexican kid was knocking at his motel door. He was young and nervous and clean-cut. He looked like a farm boy. He spoke no English, but he had $60 worth of black tar heroin. Levine had never forgotten the first rapturous feeling he got from heroin back in the 1960s, but through the years that followed, he also never felt that high again. Until, that is, he shot up black tar heroin that night. Levine called the number 3 times a day after that. The delivery guys changed often, and he called them all Pedro. They were reliable. They arrived quickly. Now, instead of having to brave Old Town on his 2 fake legs, Alan Levine could sit in his motel room, aware that he was just a phone call away from getting loaded. The Mexicans were the only dealers Levine had encountered who never ran out of dope. In time, prices dropped to as little as $5 a hit, as those crews brought huge supplies of high-quality tar heroin to Portland and competed against each other. Yet he noticed that they never feuded. They gave him credit. They often gave him a little extra, avid to keep him as a customer. One night, one of these kids, a driver as Alan Levine remembers it, tried to scam him, offering 18 balloons for $100 when the deal already long established was 25 balloons. Levine objected. "Let's see what the boss says," the boy said. Levine got in his car and followed the driver across Portland. They came to a house. Out came a man Levine years later determined to be Enrique Tejeda Cienfuegos, but whom he came to know then as El Gato. Tejeda Cienfuegos was from the village of Aquiles Cerdan, a few miles south of Jalisco. He and his 4 brothers ran a heroin franchise in Portland. Levine knew nothing of this. He only knew that the delivery kid was trying to screw him, and he explained this to El Gato that night. The boy now produced the 25 bags of heroin, saying in Spanish that this was what he offered Levine the whole time, and there had been some misunderstanding. El Gato was apologetic and gave Levine those 25 bags of heroin for free. Levine never saw that driver again. El Gato was evidently powerful, Levine remembered. When I spoke with him in a motel room near downtown Portland one night many years later, I tracked Levine down through his ex-wife because by then I realized the history of heroin was best told by addicts, the older the better. I sat in a chair while he, legless, sat on his bed, smoking constantly. Cigarettes gave his voice a growl as grizzled as his face, and a strange chop to his jaws that sounded when he spoke, as if he were chomping on a juicy steak. Sure enough, he knew the story of the Jalisco boys' arrival in Portland as well as anybody, even if he knew them only as a rotating series of Mexicans he called Pedro. When I showed him a mugshot, he definitely remembered El Gato. When he spoke, they acted, he said. He had some status. He took a liking to me because I paid on time. After that, they'd come and say, "Gato said to give you this, Gato said to give you that." They called me Liver because I told them I had hepatitis C and I didn't want to share needles. El Gato later gave Levine a buck knife, perhaps feeling he could use some protection. Levine realized he was worlds away now from how heroin had operated for so long. You didn't have to leave your house. Dealing with those people was paradise. You could nickel and dime them, too, when they got there. They were eager for the green money. Levine had never known any dealer to give away free drugs to get people hooked, or to keep addicts from getting clean. The kind of mythical pushers the government and the media had invented amid the dope fiend scare, until he met the Jalisco boys. This marketing technique was about that. They knew what they were doing. They were marketers. Have a good day, friends.